I've always been the kind of person who tries to see the best in people, you know? But after what happened that day, I don't trust anyone. It was a hot afternoon, and my car had broken down in the middle of nowhere. The engine just sputtered out. No cell service, no town for miles. I tried to stay calm, thinking someone would come by eventually. After about an hour, a beat-up old truck pulled up beside me. The guy driving looked like your average guy in his 40s. Scruffy beard, baseball cap, seemed friendly enough. He rolled down the window and asked if I needed help. I hesitated, but what was I supposed to do? Sit there for hours in the heat? So I told him I needed a lift to the nearest gas station, and he agreed. I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and got in the passenger seat. At first, everything seemed fine. He was making small talk, nothing creepy. But then, as we drove, he started steering the conversation in a different direction. Asked if I lived alone, if I had family nearby. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I played it off, gave him vague answers. Then he said, "You know, there's a shortcut up ahead. Might save us some time." My stomach twisted. There was something about the way he said it, like he was testing me. I glanced around. No other cars in sight, just endless stretches of road and trees. I didn't have a good feeling about it, but I couldn't exactly jump out of a moving truck. I tried to keep calm, told him the main road was fine. He didn't argue, but I noticed his grip on the wheel tighten. A few minutes later, he slowed down near a dirt path that led into the woods. My heart started racing. He said, "I've got a cabin back there. We can stop by, get some water, rest up. It's nice and quiet. You'd like it." That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I told him I wasn't feeling well, made up some excuse about being sick. He gave me this look, like he didn't believe me. But after a long pause, he nodded and turned back onto the main road. I stayed quiet the rest of the drive, praying he'd take me to the gas station and not somewhere else. When we finally pulled up, I could hardly breathe. I thanked him quickly and got out, walking straight into the station without looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside, surrounded by people. Later, when I had service again, I called a friend to pick me up. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if I'd gone with him to that cabin. I always told myself I'd stop picking up hitchhikers. After hearing all those horror stories, I figured it wasn't worth the risk. But sometimes you let your guard down, and that's when things go wrong. It was late, and I was driving through a stretch of highway with nothing but fields on either side. That's when I saw him, this guy walking along the side of the road, carrying a huge duffel bag. He looked exhausted, like he'd been walking for hours. I felt bad for him, so I pulled over and offered him a ride. He was quiet when he got in, barely said a word, just nodded when I asked where he was headed. The bag he was carrying was massive, so I offered to put it in the trunk. He hesitated for a second, then agreed. It was heavy too, like unreasonably heavy for a normal bag. As we drove, the guy didn't talk much, and I didn't push it, but every now and then I'd catch him glancing at me in the rearview mirror, like he was studying me or something. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. When we finally got to where he said he needed to go, he got out without a word, grabbed his bag from the trunk, and disappeared into the night. I was relieved to be rid of him, honestly, but when I went to close the trunk, that's when I saw it. Blood. Not just a drop or two, but a small, smeared pool of it in the corner, right where his bag had been. My stomach flipped, and I stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I don't know what was in that bag, and I sure as hell didn't stick around to find out. But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that I just gave a ride to someone running from something, or worse, hiding something. You know, I used to think hitchhiking was no big deal. I'd pick people up now and then. Most of the time, they were just regular folks needing a ride. But after what happened that one night, I'll never do it again. It was raining hard. You know, one of those nights where the road disappears in front of you. I was driving home from a late shift, eyes tired, just wanting to get home. That's when I saw her, standing on the side of the road, soaked to the bone, thumb out. She looked harmless, early 30s maybe, wearing jeans and a jacket that was clinging to her from the rain. So I figured I'd do the good thing and pull over. She thanked me when she got in, shivering. Her name was Sarah, she said. Just needed to get to the next town over. No big deal. I didn't think much of it at first. She seemed polite, a little quiet, but, I mean, who's chatty when they've been standing in the pouring rain, right? We drove in silence for a while, just the sound of the rain hitting the car. But then I started noticing things that didn't sit right. Her hands. She was fidgeting with them constantly, like she couldn't keep them still. And there was something on her fingers. Dirt. Number I realized they were scratched up, almost like she'd been clawing at something. I tried to shake it off, but then she started asking strange questions. Things like, how far is the next gas station? Or, is this road always so quiet? Her voice was calm, but there was this edge to it, like she was thinking about something else entirely. Then, out of nowhere, she asked if I had a towel in the back seat. When I glanced at her, she was staring straight ahead, but her hands, man, they were clenched tight. I pointed behind me, told her there was an old blanket she could use. She reached back, and that's when I saw it. A stain on her jacket. Dark, wet, but not from the rain. It was too thick, too dark. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. I just kept driving, heart pounding in my chest. The next town wasn't far, but it felt like hours. When we finally got there, she asked to be let out at some random corner, nowhere near a bus stop or store. Just a dark street. As soon as she stepped out, she gave me this look. It wasn't a thank you or goodbye. It was like she knew something I didn't. And then, without a word, she disappeared into the rain. I didn't stick around to see where she went. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the news was all over the radio. A woman had been found dead just a few miles from where I picked her up. They said she'd been attacked and left in the woods just hours before I saw Sarah. I never told anyone about it. I still wonder, did I pick up the victim or the one who killed her?